The word human made the Vulcan king Juno quiver with dread. He cowered in the depths of his ruined palace, flinching at distant explosions as the human forces tore through his crumbling capital city. Juno's regal robes hung loosely on his gaunt frame, a shadow of the once proud ruler he had been before the human onslaught brought the mighty Vulcan Empire to its knees. "Sire, the humans have broken through the last defenses," Zoran, Juno's battle-scarred advisor, reported grimly as he rushed into the fortified bunker. "Commander Holmes leads the charge. Our forces are scattered and overrun." Juno's mind raced with bitter memories of his people's arrogance. They had dismissed the humans as primitive upstarts, unworthy of concern, even as the relentless human fleets spread across the stars, their technology and tactics evolving at a terrifying pace. Amusement turned to unease, then dread as human victories mounted. The bunker shook as human breaching charges detonated above. Juno's elite guard lay dead or dying against the human onslaught. The king realized, far too late, the depths of his hubris. The Vulcan Empire, with all its vaunted supremacy, had underestimated human ingenuity and resolve. Now the fate of his entire species hung in the balance, subject to the mercy of an enemy they once deemed beneath their notice. The humans would decide if the Vulcans endured or perished. In the face of this reckoning, Juno could only tremble and pray to gods who had long since abandoned him. The word human echoed in his mind, a death knell tolling the end of an empire undone by its own fatal pride. As the bunker shuddered from the human assault above, Juno's mind drifted back to a fateful moment that now seemed to mock him with its significance. 3 years prior, when the Vulcan Empire still stood at the height of its power and arrogance, a human diplomatic envoy had arrived at the royal court, seeking an audience with the king. Ambassador Ryan Taylor, a tall, broad-shouldered man with piercing blue eyes and a calm demeanor, had stood before Juno's throne, flanked by a small retinue of human diplomats. Juno remembered the way he had lounged on his throne, barely deigning to acknowledge the human's presence. "Your Majesty," Taylor had begun, his voice steady and respectful, "I come to you today with an offer of peace and cooperation between our two great civilizations. The human race seeks not conquest, but partnership, a chance to learn from each other and grow together in harmony." Juno had laughed then, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed through the grand audience chamber. "Partnership?" he had sneered, his eyes narrowing with disdain. "With primitives who have barely crawled their way into the stars? The Vulcan Empire has no need of your cooperation, human. We are the masters of the galaxy, and we do not sully ourselves with the likes of your kind." Taylor's jaw had tightened, but he maintained his composure. "Your Majesty, I implore you to reconsider. Our two races have much to offer each other. To dismiss this chance for peace is to invite conflict and suffering on a scale neither of us can imagine." But Juno, secure in his own superiority, had waved a dismissive hand. "Begone from my sight, Ambassador. Take your mewling pleas for peace and peddle them elsewhere. The Vulcan Empire has no time for such weaknesses." As Taylor and his envoy departed, Juno had thought nothing more of the encounter, considering it beneath his notice. But now, as his empire crumbled around him and the human forces closed in, the memory of that moment burned in his mind with searing clarity. A fatal mistake born of pride and folly. The sound of footsteps approaching jolted Juno back to the present. His advisors crowded around him, their faces etched with fear and desperation. "Your Majesty, we must flee," urged Prime Minister Zoran, his voice strained. "The humans will show no mercy. Our only hope is to seek refuge among our allies and regroup for a counterattack." But Juno, his heart heavy with the weight of his own failures, shook his head. "No, I will not abandon our people to the slaughter. If the Vulcan Empire is to fall, then I shall fall with it." Ignoring the protests of his advisors, Juno strode to the armory, where his battle armor hung in silent repose. With trembling hands, he donned the ancient suit of war, feeling the weight of generations of Vulcan warriors settling upon his shoulders. As he emerged from the armory, the final defenses of the palace bunker shattered with a deafening blast. Human soldiers poured into the chamber, their weapons trained on the Vulcan king and his entourage. But to Juno's surprise, the soldiers parted to reveal a familiar figure striding forward. Commander Chris Holmes, the scourge of the Vulcan Empire. Juno tensed, expecting to be cut down at any moment, but Holmes held up a hand, staying his troops. "King Juno," Holmes said, his voice calm but firm, "I come not to execute you, but to offer a choice." Juno's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What choice could you possibly offer me, human? Your kind has made your intentions clear." Holmes shook his head. "You mistake our intentions, Your Majesty. We seek not the annihilation of the Vulcan race, but an end to this destructive conflict. Ambassador Taylor, the man you once dismissed, has advocated tirelessly for a peaceful resolution." Juno's eyes widened with shock. Taylor, the human he had scorned and humiliated, now sought to save him? Holmes continued, "If you surrender unconditionally and agree to face trial for your crimes against humanity, we are prepared to negotiate a truce that will spare your people further suffering. The choice is yours, King Juno. Cling to your pride and face certain doom, or accept this chance for redemption and the survival of your race." Juno stood frozen, his mind turning with the implications of Holmes's words. Could he trust this offer? Could he humble himself before his enemies and accept their judgment? As he hesitated, torn between pride and the desperate hope for salvation, Zoran stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "the fate of our people rests in your hands. Is one man's pride worth the destruction of an entire civilization?" Juno closed his eyes, the weight of his decision bearing down upon him like a physical force. In that moment, he saw the faces of his people, the countless lives that depended on his choice, and with a heavy heart, he knew what he must do. Opening his eyes, Juno met Holmes's gaze, his voice steady despite the turmoil raging within him. "I accept your offer, Commander Holmes. I surrender myself to human justice, in the hope that my people may be spared." As the human soldiers stepped forward to take him into custody, Juno felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. For the first time in his life, he had put the needs of his people above his own pride and arrogance. And though he knew that a difficult road lay ahead, he dared to hope that this choice might lead to a new beginning, not just for the Vulcan race, but for the future of all sentient beings in the galaxy. As the human soldiers surrounded Juno, he felt the weight of his decision settle upon him. Commander Holmes nodded, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "A wise choice, Your Majesty. Come with us." Juno's advisors watched in stunned silence as their king was led away. The once proud ruler shuffled forward, his battle armor now feeling more like a cage than protection. As they emerged from the bunker, the acrid smell of smoke and destruction assaulted Juno's senses. The sight that greeted him stole his breath away. His magnificent capital, once a shining jewel of Vulcan might, lay in ruins. Towering spires of gleaming metal were reduced to twisted, smoking husks. The streets, once teeming with life, were now littered with debris and the remnants of battle. A sleek human shuttle descended from the sky, landing gracefully amidst the chaos. The hatch opened, revealing a familiar face that sent a jolt of recognition through Juno's body. Ambassador Ryan Taylor stepped out, his piercing blue eyes scanning the scene before settling on the defeated Vulcan king. Juno's mind raced. This was the man he had dismissed, the olive branch he had callously tossed aside. Now, Taylor held the fate of the Vulcan people in his hands. As the ambassador approached, Juno found himself speaking, his voice hoarse and desperate. "Ambassador Taylor, I was wrong about everything. The Vulcan people, we have much to offer. Our knowledge, our technology, it could benefit the galaxy. Please show mercy, not for me, but for my people." Taylor's expression remained neutral, but his eyes softened slightly. "Your Majesty, I appreciate your words, but understand this, you will face trial for your actions. The Vulcan Empire must submit to human oversight. However, I am willing to negotiate terms that will spare your people from total subjugation." As Taylor spoke, a commotion erupted nearby. A group of Vulcan civilians had gathered, their faces a mix of emotions. Some shouted angrily at Juno, calling him a coward and a traitor. Others wept openly, relief evident in their trembling forms. Zoran pushed through the crowd, his voice rising above the din. Listen to me. King Juno has given us a chance at survival. We must seize this opportunity for peace. The gathered Vulcans fell silent, their eyes fixed on Zoran as he continued. We have a choice. Adapt to this new reality or face extinction. Cooperation with the humans is our only path forward. As Zoran's words sank in, murmurs of agreement began to spread through the crowd. Even some of the angry faces softened, replaced by looks of resigned acceptance. Taylor turned to Juno, his voice low. Your advisor speaks wisely. Come, we have much to discuss. As Juno was led towards the shuttle, he caught sight of a familiar figure in the distance. General Zachris stood atop a ruined building, his eyes burning with barely suppressed fury. The general's hand rested on his weapon, his posture radiating defiance. Juno felt a chill run down his spine. He knew Zachris well. The general was not one to accept defeat graciously. As the shuttle's hatch closed behind him, Juno couldn't shake the feeling that this war might not be over just yet. Yet, as the shuttle lifted off, carrying Juno and Taylor to begin negotiations, the king's fears were about to be realized. Days later, Juno stood in the diplomatic compound, watching Ambassador Taylor engage with a group of Vulcan elders. The humans' patience and genuine interest in Vulcan culture had surprised Juno, chipping away at his long-held prejudices. A sudden explosion rocked the building, shattering windows and sending everyone to the floor. Smoke filled the air as armed Vulcan soldiers burst into the room, their weapons trained on the humans. "Protect the king," one shouted, grabbing Juno's arm. "The humans are trying to assassinate you." Before Juno could process what was happening, the room erupted in gunfire. Human guards fell, their bodies crumpling to the ground. Ambassador Taylor dove for cover, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. "Stop!" Juno roared, but his voice was lost in the chaos. The firefight lasted mere minutes before human reinforcements arrived, subduing the Vulcan attackers. As the smoke cleared, Juno found himself face to face with a livid Commander Holmes. "You treacherous snake," Holmes snarled, his weapon inches from Juno's face. "I should execute you right now." "Wait!" Zoran's voice cut through the tension. The advisor rushed forward, a datapad in his hand. "Commander, please, this attack wasn't sanctioned by King Juno. Look at this." Holmes snatched the pad, his eyes narrowing as he read. "General Zachris," he muttered. "He orchestrated this?" Juno's heart sank. Zachris, his most loyal general, had betrayed him. "Commander," he said, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil, "I had no knowledge of this plot. Please, we must continue our negotiations. It's the only way to prevent further bloodshed." For a tense moment, Holmes said nothing. Then slowly he lowered his weapon. "Zachris and his co-conspirators will be arrested immediately. But this isn't over, Juno. One more misstep, and all bets are off." As Holmes turned away, barking orders to his troops, Juno felt a flicker of hope. But that hope was short-lived. A distant explosion echoed through the city, followed by the sound of weapons fire. Zoran rushed to the window, his face pale. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice tight with fear, "the capital is under attack. It's our own people." Juno joined him at the window, watching in horror as smoke rose from multiple locations across the cityscape. Vulcan ships engaged in dogfights with human vessels, while on the ground, civilians ran for cover amidst the chaos. "Commander Holmes," Juno said, turning to the human leader, "I must speak with my people. This madness has to stop." Holmes studied him for a long moment before nodding. "You have one chance, Juno. Make it count." As Juno was escorted to a secure communications center, he steeled himself for the confrontation to come. He knew the face he would see on the other end of the transmission, Valora, his once trusted advisor and now leader of the hardline rebels. The screen flickered to life, revealing Valora's stern visage. Her eyes narrowed as she saw Juno. "So the human puppet shows his face," she sneered. "Have you come to beg for our surrender, traitor?" Juno felt a flash of anger but pushed it aside. "Valora, this fighting is pointless. We cannot win against the humans. Our only hope for survival is cooperation." "Survival?" Valora spat. "You call subjugation survival? I'd rather die fighting than live on my knees. And what of our people? Juno countered. How many more must die for your pride? Valora's expression hardened. Our people will thank us when we've driven these human oppressors from our world. This conversation is over. The screen went dark, leaving Juno staring at his own reflection. Behind him, he heard Holmes speaking urgently into his communicator. What's happened? Juno asked, turning to face the human commander. Holmes' face was grim. Ambassador Taylor is dead. Vulcan sniper. The words hit Juno like a physical blow. Taylor, the man who had fought so hard for peace, was gone. And with him, perhaps their last chance for a peaceful resolution. Holmes's eyes blazed with barely suppressed fury. I'm done playing games, Juno. It's time to end this, once and for all. As the human commander stormed out, already coordinating a full-scale assault, Juno felt the weight of his people's fate pressing down on him. He had one last chance to prevent total annihilation. But how could he reach a population so blinded by pride and fear? The answer came to him suddenly, clear as crystal. He turned to Zoran, who stood silently nearby. Get me access to the planetary communications network, Juno ordered. It's time I spoke to all of our people. As Zoran hurried to comply, Juno closed his eyes, gathering his thoughts. The future of the Vulcan race hung in the balance. His next words would determine whether they survived or perished. The weight of that responsibility was almost unbearable, but he knew he had to try. For the first time in his life, Juno prayed, not to the gods he had long since abandoned, but to the spirit of Ambassador Taylor. He hoped that somewhere, somehow, the human who had fought so hard for peace would guide his words. The communication system hummed to life. Juno opened his eyes, took a deep breath, and prepared to address his people one last time. Juno's voice echoed across the planet, reaching every Vulcan home, ship, and battlefield. His words, raw with emotion, yet tempered by wisdom, cut through the chaos of war. My people, he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his heart. I stand before you not as your king, but as a fellow Vulcan who has seen the cost of our pride. We face a choice, continue this futile struggle and face extinction, or embrace a new path forward with the humans. As Juno spoke, the sounds of battle across the planet began to fade. Vulcan soldiers lowered their weapons, listening intently to their former ruler's words. I have seen firsthand the humanity of our so-called enemies, Juno continued. They offer us not subjugation, but partnership, a chance to rebuild, to learn, to grow. Yes, we will lose some of our autonomy, but we will gain so much more. In homes across the planet, families huddled around communication devices, hanging on every word. On the streets, civilians and soldiers alike stood in stunned silence. The humans are not the monsters we believed them to be, Juno said, his voice growing stronger. They are beings capable of compassion, of forgiveness. Even now, after all we have done, they offer us a chance at peace. In the command center, Commander Holmes watched Juno with a mixture of surprise and grudging respect. The Vulcan king he had dismissed as arrogant and short-sighted was revealing depths Holmes had never imagined. Juno's voice cracked slightly as he continued. I have made many mistakes. My pride, my fear of the unknown, led us down this path of destruction. But we can choose a different path now. We can choose life, progress, and a future for our children. As Juno's words faded, a profound silence settled over the planet. Then slowly, reports began to filter in. Across the globe, Vulcan forces were laying down their arms. The rebellion, sparked by fear and fanned by pride, was extinguishing itself in the face of Juno's humility and vision. In the days that followed, an uneasy peace settled over the planet. Juno, no longer wearing the trappings of royalty, worked tirelessly alongside Commander Holmes and the newly appointed human ambassador to establish the framework for a human-Vulcan alliance. The negotiations were fraught with tension and setbacks. Old prejudices died hard, and trust was a fragile commodity. Yet day by day, progress was made. Juno's unwavering commitment to peace and his willingness to embrace human ideas slowly won over even the most skeptical of his people. As the weeks turned to months, the alliance began to take shape. Plans were drawn up for joint scientific endeavors, cultural exchanges, and shared governance structures. The Vulcan people, initially wary, began to see the potential benefits of cooperation with their former enemies. Yet even as hope blossomed, a shadow loomed on the horizon. General Zachris, once Juno's most trusted military advisor, had vanished in the chaos of the surrender. Rumors swirled of a growing resistance movement, determined to restore Vulcan supremacy at any cost. Juno, now serving on the newly formed Vulcan Transitional Council, couldn't shake the feeling that Zachris posed a grave threat to the fragile peace. As he prepared for the council's inaugural ceremony, a mix of hope and apprehension filled his heart. The future of two civilizations hung in the balance, and the road ahead was far from certain.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.